Okay, we're live. And first of all, good morning, and I do apologise for my tie. It does look like a bilious attack, but please try and ignore it, or I could sit like this. Now, good morning. Now, in my view, the last real king of England was Harold in 1066. Since then, all we've had is Norman interlopers. Now, from the 17th century, it can be said we've had there's been some meddling with the royals by the banksters. Now, this morning, I'm speaking to Caroline Stevens, whose YouTube channel is Caroline Stevens Seeking the Truth. And you can see her website, hopefully going along the bottom on a banner of this screen. Now, we're going to talk about the Queen's speech, which I believe is tomorrow. So, good morning, Caroline.
Morning, and thanks for having me on your show again. I hope this is going to be a regular 9:30 on a Thursday morning event. It gives us something to aim for, doesn't it? Well, last Thursday, of course, we had the general election, and we now have the Queen's speech, which is going to be given tomorrow. The Queen is at the heart of everything, it would appear. And it was interesting. I did a video at the weekend when I discovered what Boris Johnson and the Queen were planning to do together and to basically talk about in her speech, and which one particular important part, apart from leaving the EU, allegedly on the 31st of January.
Are we really? I thought it was a rumour.
Well, and talking about his deal, it's all got to be passed through. And just looking at his deal, it's not very much different to Theresa May's deal. So it was rejected. Theresa May's deal was rejected by everybody, so it didn't please anybody. So what's to say that Boris Johnson's deal's going to get through? But apart from that, he's promising more money to the NHS, which obviously we're in financial dire straits with the NHS because so much of it now has been privatised. You know, you've got these private funding initiatives, and how they're going to be paid off, I don't know, because these deals can last for decades and decades, and it would cost so much for us to buy out those deals from the banksters. But I think that will just be a drop in the ocean, the money that he's promising for the NHS. And of course, that will be drip fed over the next however many years. But what really threw me was the fact that this Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which they don't seem to be adhering to anyway, because since we've had an election in 2015, election in 2017, and an election in 2019, and we're supposed to have one every 5 years and not before. So it looks like now the Queen and Boris want Boris potentially to sit on his throne till 2029, 10 years. What a scary prospect that is.
Terrifying. But also, I still believe that this time next year and the year after that, we'll be talking about, I don't like to use the word Brexit, but coming out of the EU, because I think they're just it's a farce. It really is. And I read in the papers the other day that there's talking about a deal where you can still be an EU citizen. Now, I don't know the full details of that deal that they're thinking about. I don't think they're implementing it yet, but it could be something where, when you go overseas, or say you're going to go to France for the day or something, it'd be EU passport holders, UK passport holders, and there'll be a massive queue for the UK passport holders, and you can just walk straight through with the EU passport holders. So it'd be like sort of stealth. And I think it's a bit like the way they're introducing cash-free society. They're just doing it by stealth. They're going to make it difficult for you to use cash. And I think there's going to be these little things in between that will keep us, shall we say, not on paper in the EU, but people think we're out of the EU. And that's what I personally believe. What's your view of this, Caroline?
Well, I just think that we won't discover the truth for a very long time. I mean, we know that the government certainly weren't preparing for us leaving the EU. We're still adhering to the Court of Justice. So it's like we're still tied up with the big boys. We're still tied up with the banksters. We still have a corrupt court system. We still have many treaties and declarations which our government is signing up to and has signed us up to. And, we've got, riots all over the world now. And I think that next year will be a particularly challenging time for the British people. I mean, I'm just looking at a new UN report that's been just published, and it's about human progress. Now, over the years, the idea was that people had greater aspirations, greater living standards, but the UN is actually now admitting that due to education, due to climate change, there's no ladder now for the middle classes and for the working classes to move upwards. And this is having an impact on people's mental health. But it's all right for the UN to report on these matters. This is what they've designed for the world in the first place. They're actually seeing the success, the fruit of their labours, because they have undoubtedly engineered this so that we have got our children. What have they got to look forward to? Is it going to be, should we be carting them off to university these days, getting them into £50,000 worth of debt, with no prospect of them ever being able to pay that off, and them having literally a shackle, on their ankles, if you like, for the rest of their lives? And you see these reports and say, oh, well, if you've got this degree or that degree, you could increase your earnings by, 10% a year compared to other people. Yeah, but this is all pie in the sky, and this is all retrospective as well. This is looking back. I'm looking at the future. And what with artificial intelligence thrown in as well, we're having there's no doubt about it. The UN's Agenda 2030 is all about a race to the bottom for the middle classes and the working classes.
Well, the middle class has actually been dissipated. That started in about the 1970s, 1980s, I believe. I mean, there isn't really any middle class as such. You've got upper class and working class now. And it was the middle classes in the Victorian times that forged things forward, and they actually pushed the government. It was the middle class that did that. And without the middle class, the upper class have just got a minority, have got their full say on everything. So I wouldn't like to use the word democratic, but it's rather undemocratic, because who is actually middle class nowadays? So I don't think there is any middle class.
Well, I guess it's people that aren't on benefits, for starters. But yes, I mean, that takes me into so listening to this UN report that was on something called the Kyle Kulinski show, and I believe he's American. And so we've got the emerging. He was particularly focusing on the emerging middle classes and what would happen to them. And he was really talking about focusing really on direct democracy, because that is something that, we've got no control now over our governments. They're not listening to us. In fact, most corporations now, the people don't really have any say. And of course, in years gone by, we used to have unions. The people used to take pride in who they worked for, and they felt quite often with certain schemes that their employers, benevolent schemes, like there were a lot of companies used to be able to work from the cradle to the grave. You would get either free gifts or a certain allocation of whatever they were producing. You get discounts, and there was a genuine belongingness. Even in years gone by, if you think back years further, you had the places like Port Sunlight Village. You had lovely accommodation for people to live in. And what have we got now? We've got people who work in shops. They've got their rents to pay. They're paying rents because there's no housing association properties. And even if there is a housing association, some of the rents are pretty steep. And, if there's only one of you living in that accommodation, and you're working in a shop, for example, and you're trying to put bread on the table, there's not much wiggle room each month, is there?
Well, that's right. I mean, when I left school, you went into a career. The word job is a reasonably recent word. People had an occupation. They had something that they could look forward to, something that you really wanted to do. But have you noticed it kind of tones the situation down? To me, a job is a task that you have to do, that you don't really want to do, whereas a career is something that you really want to do. And how can a person have pride in their work when they're on short-term contracts, when they're just basically working to feed themselves and keep a roof over their heads if they can? And they've actually downscaled everything. For example, people used to claim entitlements from the government. It's called your entitlement. Now it's benefits. And again, it's all, why is it a benefit if you paid in for it? It is an entitlement if you paid in for it. And I think that what they're doing, they're downplaying things with words.
And you talk about 0 hours contracts. I mean, I was reading an article. I was reading an article about, this time of year, you're getting a lot of delivery drivers on 0 hours contracts and working extremely hard. And they'd interviewed a guy anonymously, and he basically said he was working 70 hours a week. Well, there are supposed to be rules and regulations for this, even on 0 hours contracts. And what these unscrupulous employers or contractors are doing is basically producing fictitious names, and then the guy gets sent out again under a different name.
That's right. And have you noticed when you go into a supermarket now, you're actually doing the cashier's job, because they've got self-service where you just go through and you scan the stuff yourself. So you're doing their job for them, really. And people are being used literally as, to me, it is slavery, because people are desperate for work, and they're desperate, and there's no real, as I say, skills now seem to be very thin on the ground. You go back, say 40, 50, or you go back to something like Henry Ford. Now with Henry Ford, he introduced a production line, brought the price of cars down, the Model T Ford. And a marvelous advertising thing he did was staff who worked for Fords could buy a very, very cheap Ford because they got a staff discount. So the whole of America was covered in Fords, and people were saying, oh, it must be a good car. It was these workers, and he was very good to these workers. But when you look at unions, yes, they were a good thing for stopping terrible. I mean, when you look at the way the Victorians treated people, and then you had the rise of the unions in the sort of Edwardian times, and then in the 20s and 30s, yes, they were a good thing. But then what happened in the 60s, and as far back as perhaps the 50s, the ideological subversion Soviet Union got in. And with ideological subversion, you take a country over by not fighting a war, but by, shall we say, destroying it within, by helping and aiding the dissidents, the people that don't like the country. So what you had was Red Robbo, you had people that were really taking advantage of the situation, being funded by the former Soviet Union, and there's a lot of evidence for that now. So you had a situation where, for example, if a person was working in a car factory and they were working on screwing a gizmo into a whatchamacallit, and a piece of wire fell down, they were not allowed to lift that piece of wire back and put it back. They had to call an electrician to go and pick the wire up and put it back on. And the whole country became inefficient by design. And then you got Margaret Thatcher come in that absolutely smashed the unions, so that it went the other way. So the actual working person has actually was a slave, it is a slave. And when you look at the situation from that point of view, where the unions were infiltrated and used to destroy the country, and then you got a leader in that was destroyed the unions, and then from about the Margaret Thatcher period onwards, we've had short-term contracts, workers gone scarce, Amount of unemployment went through the roof. It's horrendous. And when you've got high unemployment, people are desperate, they'll do anything. And that works in the employer's favour to a point. So,
I'll tell you something though, when we talk about voting, because we have this idea that in 100 years ago or so, it was the women that were disenfranchised. In actual fact, a lot of people perhaps don't realise, but it was the working men. They didn't have the vote either, did they?
No, you had to. I think you had to have a business to have a vote. Please correct me on this. I may be wrong, but I think in the Victorian times you had to have a business. I'll look that up. I'm not too sure on that, but I know that women only got the vote for the age of 21 in about the 1920s, I think it was. And then he brought the voting age down to 18. I think it was in the 70s or something like that. It used to be 21 because my father used to be angry. He was conscripted to fight the war at the age of 20, but he wasn't old enough to vote. Yet you voted at 21.
That doesn't seem right, does it? I mean, that really, actually, that's a good point. You have no right in whether you can go to say you don't want to go to war, but yet. But the thing is, we know that the voting system's rigged anyway, and that's what after that general election of last week, I looked at the number of votes that some pantomime dame had got in a place called Exeter, and he or she, probably he actually, had 306 votes, and then you had all these independent candidates who'd done serious campaign work who'd got less than 306 votes. So that's the state of our country, that there's no point. And this is what this UN report was basically highlighting, the fact that if the people do not feel any link to their government, and this must be the widest gap ever now certainly in our living memories, but there is no point. All we're doing is we're just accepting whatever crumbs they give to us, and they keep shrouding all this new acts as it's all done in our favor, but in actual fact it isn't at all, is it? All this facial recognition technology, oh yes, it will stop the terrorists. But no, it's about Big Brother watching us, because they've let the terrorists in the first place. And the way that society has become disenfranchised, I guess, that you've got people in their little cells in the UK, terrorist cells. And I'm sure that with the fact that we're using our mobile phones, that mobile phones can be used as tracking devices, they know where these terrorists are. Don't come all this guff about, it's all about terrorism. No, it's not. And of course, we know there's a lot of false flags around as well. And that's just to create tension between groups of people.
Well, that's right. I mean, now the Muslims are the Jews of the past. I mean, you've always it's Muslim this, Muslim that, Muslim the other. You've always got to have a group that is against society, haven't you? And you can go onto Facebook, go anywhere, Muslim grooming gangs. Yes, I'm sure there are Muslim grooming gangs. There's grooming gangs of all religions.
There definitely are. But then, the parliamentarians who, what are they getting up to as well?
Well, precisely. And when you look at the way society is manipulated, for example, as I've often said, who votes for the civil servants? Because they run the country. Did you vote for them? I didn't vote for them. So you've got this faceless breed of people that are running the country. Who voted for the bankers? Did you vote for them? I didn't vote for them. I didn't vote Rothschild. They didn't have Rothschild. You put a little cross against the box. Who votes for the large multinational companies? I didn't get the vote on that somehow. No. All I did get the chance to vote for is Punch and Judy. Oh, sorry, I mean the political system. Was it Labour, Conservative, or the pantomime day, or whatever?
Were you aware that in the 1930s there was something called the Geneva Treaty, and basically all the governments like ours were bankrupted So that's why now we're beholden totally to the banksters. We capitulated in the early 30s to them. So that's the reason why you write to your MP for help. 99% of the time, they can't do anything, even if they wanted to. They can't even change the regulations of traffic control outside of primary school, which is what happened in my area. They can't do anything. They really are powerless.
Well, really, the art of a good MP is to be seen to be doing, but not exactly doing anything. And that is the art of a good civil servant, to be seen to be doing, but not actually doing anything. Because I've been to see my local MP, and all he does is he just shunts the information. He delegates. He's a very good delegator. Okay, you do that, you do that. And he can give you a lot of information that doesn't really tell you anything. He's very good at that. You know, I've contacted this department, that department says blah, 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 more blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't really tell you anything. And it's a bit like a speech from Tony Blair or a Chinese meal. You know, it fills you up, but afterwards you think, a bit empty.
Well, it's funny you talk about the media and their MPs. And I was watching a mini debate on television last night between Lord Chris Grade. I'll just call him Chris Grade. Why are we calling these people lords? What have they done to deserve that? Chris Grade and Andrew Bridgen, the MP. And I think Andrew Bridgen is probably quite a good guy. He probably tries to do the best he can under very difficult circumstances. So they were having a debate, and they were saying, Andrew Bridgen was saying it's a regressive tax as the TV license. And of course, Chris Grade would be saying, well, you know, he would be supporting the TV license. And I know I get quite a lot of e-petitions through on Facebook. I don't know about yourself about the BBC license. But quite frankly, you know, in the big scheme of things now, I'm sort of taking a sidestep away from that. Yes, it's an important issue because whoever is in control of that little box basically has a control over many people's minds. But, you know, we've just got so many other issues now. I mean, I also watched a video this morning, about how many meals we're all away from starvation.
Well, that's right. The more minimum coming, we are actually very close. There's crop failures. Sorry to chime in, and I hope I didn't.
No.
Walk over you, but I'm not. This is second-hand information. I'm not a weather expert or anything by far. Not, but the real experts. I'm not talking about the stupid. Ridiculous sort of man-made global warming hype, which is another tax, but we're going into a mini ice age, which will last about 20 years. Nothing to worry about. It happened in the Victorian times, and it happened in the 17th century when the Thames froze over. They used to have frost fairs, but there's massive crop failures. And if you to look to the future, you've got to look into the past. And when we had our previous mini ice ages, it caused the most ferocious uprisings and mass starvation in Europe. And I fear that that's going to happen again because they've got this stupid man-made global warming nonsense going on, and they're not noticing, they're not preparing for, and in America, they've already got massive crop failures. And this is happening in Europe, but that's out of the news. They're not saying anything about that. And prices are going to go up through, going to go through the roof. And as well, I think it was Stalin that said you're only, is it 2 or 3 million, which is very true. Because once the supermarket,
that's a good point, actually. You see, I having just been to Australia, I'm very, very focused now on our links with our Commonwealth brothers and sisters, and seeing what their farmers are enduring. And of course, earlier this week, they had their hottest day recorded in living. They had the hottest day, I think it was Tuesday, in many cities in Australia. And I know the farmers are suffering. They've got problems with water supplies. And of course, this sort of all fits in with, as you say, we're supposed to be going to an ice age now because there's been a polar shift. So on the one hand, the UN and our governments are saying, yes, climate change, trying to bankrupt all the people. And then we've got, on the other hand, we should be keeping our sheepskin coats. I mean, why is it that the rich are building places underground to keep away from the cold, perhaps, do we think? Not the heat.
Look at the seed bank in Norway. That's underground, isn't it?
Yes. I was going to say the seed bank in Norway. Well, of course, the elites are in charge of their own seed bank. So whatever happens up here, whatever they do to destroy planet Earth, they have their escape route all mapped out. So as you say, yeah, it was quite moving, was watching this film 9 Meals Away from Anarchy. And yeah, it's going to be a case of people will be taken to the streets. Supermarkets now, if you think about it, if there's a special offer on in the supermarket, and say the offer starts on a Tuesday, you can guarantee by Thursday that offer will be wiped out. And the supermarkets only get a certain allocation, don't they, on that cheap offer? It was perhaps to bring the punters in, and then they won't get they won't probably get it replenished by the time the offer finishes in, say, for the following Tuesday. So can you imagine that situation being replicated in saying to people, well, all the food, we've only got 2 days supply, and unless you are going to put like restrictions. I don't know if you remember the sugar crisis years and years ago, where you were only allowed, was it 1 bag of sugar per adult or family?
Well. Remember that?
It's what?
You can get coffee. Coffee disappeared off the shelves. You just could not get coffee.
When was that?
About 1980, 79, around about that time.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
But so you've got this situation where, can you imagine all the food being wiped out literally within hours? I mean, there would be, if you didn't put restrictions on there, you would have anarchy, wouldn't you? You would have riots in the supermarkets.
Well, you would, because we've got this thing called just in time. Now, storage space.
Do I know just in time? Have I interviewed just in time?
Sorry? No, just in time. I'm not talking about a person called just in time.
I know.
It's a situation called just in time, which means that if you've got, say, a huge warehouse full of goods, that's costing money. So what you do, you have the smallest area, and you get your suppliers to supply you at the right, between a certain time. So they'll have something like, I'm only guessing now, 24-hour window where they can freshly supply you. So you don't have a backup at all. And you notice that supermarkets now, they have much smaller storage space and a much larger sales area. So this just in time, it works through the car industry as well. So that if there's a production line of cars and they want, say, headlights, where years ago they'd have a storage area full of headlights, they don't have that anymore. They'll have lorries coming in and put them into a very small area, and they'll supply X amount of headlights per day, week, month, or whatever. But that supplier is under strict rules to supply within that certain time. And if they don't, they get fined. And it's all to do with lawyers, and they can get, and it's the same, similar now as in the building industry as well. If, say, the architect doesn't provide the drawings in time, it can be a court case because it's breach of contract. And it's the same with this just-in-time idea. You can be done for breaching of contract, and lawyers are going, yippee, I'm making money. And there's probably courts up and down the land full of contractual problems where a supplier supplied the goods, I don't know, an hour later or something or whatever, because it'll have a knock-on effect. Now, when you go around the supermarket now, how much food has been produced in this country? And I can guarantee there's very little. Very little.
Well, that's a really, really important point, actually. I think we probably mentioned it briefly before, but yeah, you look at your beans, all these vegetables in packets. They've come from Guatemala and other countries, and they've not been produced in this country at all. And yeah, I mean, what we're going to do? I mean, it's just going to be a case of buying lots of tins, and then what will you have to cook the food, on? If, say, for example, if your electric and your gas go down. So have you thought about buying some, camping equipment? Because, I mean, I've never been camping to that extent where I've needed that type of equipment. But really, to do justice to the people who are watching, we should be saying, well, it's not a bad idea to get a little stove, is it really?
Well, that's right. But then you still got to buy the butane gas, which will be out of stock. If you want to really know what would happen, the only way we can test is if you look at places like Berlin after World War II, where people were chopping down trees for firewood, and they were taking up floorboards for firewood to keep warm, because there was such food shortages. And there's a big black market where they were getting food from the US Army and the British Army, a hell of a black market on military food and things like that. But really, they say it's not planned, but I think it probably is planned. I mean, I think UN Agenda 2030, which is to wipe out most of the population, they don't want riots in the streets as such. And I think what they're doing, they're probably poisoning the food subtly and fluoridating the water and things like that. But changing the subject slightly, going back to what we were saying about earlier, about what happened in the early 30s, people may not realize that in 1933, the American government made it law that any gold that you had, not gold rings, but gold coinage, had to be taken to the bank, and you got dollar notes in return, paper money in return. And if you didn't do that, there was some very heavy fines and possibly a prison sentence. And nobody knows what happened to that gold. Isn't that interesting? That was in 1933. You can look that up on not Wikipedia, but look it up on the internet. And I think it was America went bankrupt in 1971 and Britain went bankrupt in 1932, I believe. And since then, we've just been running on, shall we say, fresh air. Because, yeah.
Yeah. The thing is, if you buy gold now, the government knows who's bought it, how much they've bought. Everything is regulated. But yet you've got the big boys. They can mess around with gold bars and have their own smelters and change things around. So it's always, the regulation always goes against us little people.
Well,
anyway, so on that note then, Chris, I think we'll just have to wait and see now what happens with the Queen's speech. But hopefully the people watching at home will perhaps look at her speech a little bit more cynically minded, and perhaps more critically minded as well. Just think, she's going to be talking about regulations that's going to have a greater impact on us, and it will be always negative. I can guarantee it. I think there was another point that there's going to be 20 bills put through in the next few weeks, one of which was about being committed to prison, how long people are in prison. So we've already had a Brexiteer who's been put in prison for 28 days. Were you aware of that case, Chris?
Yes, I am. I don't know the full details of the case, but she said something about an MP being a traitor. That's all I know. And she's been put in prison for saying that, because you can be put in prison now for hate speech. So it's really a thought crime. And going back to George Orwell's 1984, it's playing out almost identical to what he predicted in 1948.
It really is truly despicable that we cannot speak freely in that way. Because, in fact, I didn't say anything now, because I've said we know under the Magna Carta that what we've got in Parliament they are. What can we say about them that we don't get locked up about now?
Well, precisely. To me, they're
They're
just a
occupiers. They've occupied our lands. They've taken away everything. They're treacherous. They're committing treason. They're committing treason. And this is what I found out since our last show last week, that I was talking to somebody about police. And originally they policed with common public consent.
That's right.
But of course, privatized. What was that? Sorry, Chris, what were you going to say about that?
Common law, because common law is injury, loss or harm. But now the police are in revenue collectors, because really the police statute law, for example, paying your television license, is actually a contract. If you go into a private supermarket car park and you stay longer than you should, and you get a ticket from this private supermarket or one of their contractors, that's a contract, and you don't really have to pay it because you're just saying, well, no contract. And BBC television license, that's a contract. And the police now are getting involved in things like that, whereas the police's real job is to protect us with common law, which is injury, loss or harm. That is, if somebody harms you, injures you or steals from you, that's when the police should be involved. But now they're not really bothered. If someone came into your house and broke into your house and you phone the police, they say, oh yeah, we'll be along tomorrow. And they might send a PDF, what they call it, one of these part-time policemen along to sort of take a few details. But really,
if it's not going to produce any money for them, they're not interested. And that's why, yes. So where are we today? I mean, when did it stop? Do you happen to know when they took that right away about this common consent policing? Was that when it turned into a corporation? I mean, from the 1st of December 2009, we've been living under the EU constitution anyway. So whether it coincided with them, maybe somebody could let me know. Maybe somebody can comment on the stream. But that's what would be really interesting to know. Why did it change? When did it change? And that's why our expectations of our police force are never going to be met. And why is it then when you get your council tax bills, there is a certain amount set aside for the police? Why are we paying for that?
Well, also,
anyway, that's something for people to think about, and maybe they can write in about, because there are so many topics that one could research, but it's having the time, isn't it?
Well, that's right. I mean, I noticed something near where I live. There's a police car, and it's got on the side, this police car supplied by such and such a garage. I thought, that's not right, surely. Are the police going if the garage is suddenly wrong, the police are going to go in there and say, oh, you supplied this car, but we're going to arrest you. Doesn't that seem like bribery? It's a pity I didn't take a picture.
Well, have you seen the number of police cars with LGBT, all the rainbow flag, all over?
Seen that yet. No.
Who's doing that then?
No, I haven't seen that. No. But the Queen's speech tomorrow, our viewers, please remember that we're talking about the fake queen, because to be a real queen or king, you've got to be crowned on the Stone of Destiny. And the Stone of Destiny, she got actually crowned on a fake stone because Scottish nationalists stole the stone before the coronation. And it's not a conspiracy, because if you go onto the Scottish Tourist Office site, it says you can view the Stone of Destiny in Edinburgh. So it's not a conspiracy. It's true. There it is. It's in Edinburgh.
All right, Chris. Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. Are we going to go live next Thursday? What's happening next Thursday? No, that's Boxing Day, isn't it?
Yeah. Is that all right with you?
I'm not sure I'm going to have Wi-Fi on Boxing Day. It might have to be the day after.
Okay. So Thursday or Friday, we'll let viewers know. But this is going to be a regular spot. And let's hope the sound's all right this time, because I know when I did the Mark Windows program, it was all... It was a bit like the internet when it first came out. It was also jerky. It's awful. But I think let's hope we cracked it. And I'm very, very proud of this little banner going along the bottom. It's probably irritated,
Right,
but it's
it's
your
just
new
like
website.
news now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's your new website. But trouble is, I know how to turn it off.
So poor Mark Windows has my website under his picture. I'm not complaining.
Great. Anyway, thanks, Caroline, for coming on this morning. It's been great as usual. And we'll catch up with you either Thursday or Friday next week. And, let's hope people still say, Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Let's just say, I'd like to wish everybody inner peace, happiness, laughter, and enlightenment of what's really going on. I think that's a better greeting. How about yourself?
Much better. I totally agree. Thank you. And thanks to everybody at home for watching.
Thanks.
Have
Goodbye.
a great Christmas, everybody. Yeah, bye.
Thanks.